So I'm going to kick off because we have two amazing panelists, but one of them is so amazing that they have to go and listen to, I think, Martha, a minister. But welcome to this very exciting launch of the Digital Futures for Good report. So let me first of all start by introducing my two guests today, and then I'll tell you a little bit about Digital Futures for Good and a little bit about what we're going to do this afternoon. So, Martha, why don't you kick off and introduce yourself with all of your hats?
My hats are completely confusing, I think. I'm Martha Lane Fox. You find me right now in a slightly messy office. I'm a bit embarrassed in the House of Lords, where I am a crossbench peer. But I am someone that has been lucky enough to work in and around the digital sector for a very long time. One of the things I'm talking about in Parliament today is in the International Women's Day debate, just about the relationship of women in the technology sector, which is not great, as many of you will know, which is why I'm kind of in and out of the chamber today. The main things I do are in and around government, helping government think about how to use technology better. And in the corporate sector, I sit on some boards and help some charities also think about how the next waves of technology are going to impact them. I've known Helen and the Good Things Foundation for a long time, and I'm just so in awe of the fight that she's continued to keep fighting for such a long time. So it's a great honour to be here.
Thank you, Martha. Thank you so much. And Sarah, another amazing person with lots of hats.
Yeah, with lots of hats. Yeah, thank you, Helen. Good to be here. So my hats generally are my what I would call my real hats is I'm a non-executive director on the board of BT, and I'm also the chair of the government's Money and Pension Service, which helps those in need with financial guidance. In my non-day jobs, I have other hats. One of them is I'm very involved in the world of disability inclusion. So I've been running an action group called Action Able to try to encourage businesses to take a different view on disability. Obviously, there's a lot of overlap between disability and digital exclusion, disability exclusion and digital exclusion. I've been involved in the digital exclusion inclusion organisations since probably 2012 or so when I was at Lloyd's banking organisation. We set up the digital academies and the digital index that now underlies such a lot of government policy. So yeah, like Martha, I've been a friend, colleague of Helen's for some time.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much for being here. So Digital Futures for Good was an idea that I concocted, I think, over the Christmas holidays in 2023. I thought, wouldn't it be amazing to try and, I mean, although Martha and Sarah, you said that you've been working with me and with Good Things in digital inclusion for a while, but to try and also break out of that bubble of digital inclusion and bring together, well, have for me a series of very inspiring and wonderful conversations throughout the year. We were facing into what we knew was a general election year, but we did expect the election to be somewhere like November, not in July. And about creating a series of thought leadership pieces around what a new government should do. So surprisingly to us and to most people, we had an election a bit earlier. So some of the interviews took place before the election, some after the election. And of course, just last week, the government launched their Digital Inclusion Action Plan. Which was fantastic. It's great to have it out. The government is very clear that it's just the first step in the work that they're going to do, but it's great to have that prioritization. And for me, in particular, having those 5 secretaries of state, so 5 cabinet members signing that forward to absolutely cement digital inclusion as a cross-government priority and a cross-government and relevant for cross-government policy making. The report that I'm hoping you will all read is a summary. There's a summary of all the different episodes and a link to them because actually they're still definitely all a great watch. And the report we've cut into 5 themes. The 4 themes or the 4 focus areas that the government has in the Digital Inclusion Action Plan around skills, affordable access, digital services, and confidence and community support. So we thought we would draw together our thoughts and findings from the conversations under those 4 umbrella headings. But one topic that came up throughout almost all of the conversation was actually about leadership, about the need for leadership across central government, regional government, across businesses, and of course in the civil society sector as well. So what we're going to do this afternoon, we're going to show a few clips. Martha, Sarah, and I will have a little bit of a conversation about that. And then we'll also think about what next. And obviously, as the action plan is fresh, we can probably talk a little bit about that, but also think about if it's the first step as an action plan, what we're expecting and hoping for from the government and from other actors and players in the sector moving forward. So we're going to kick off with a few clips and Martha, I think we spoke for Digital Futures for Good about a year ago. So that this was these clips are all actually, I think most of them are from before the general election. But let's watch the clips. I think it's about 3 minutes, and then we'll have a little bit of a chat with Martha and Sarah.
Leadership. I think that the Prime Minister needs to ensure that his cabinet understand how digital exclusion impacts on practically every element of the things that the government's trying to do. I mean, improve the health service, improve skills, improve access to public services, you know, give people a better chance to see their own communities flourish.
The thing that's most important, the most important solution is the leadership, because it requires different parts of government, both central and local, to engage with lots of different community groups. This is sort of complex change. So for me, like, you know, solutions 1 to 10 are called leadership. And after that, a little bit of money and a sort of organised, clear plan, which you heard in the debate in the chamber, in the Lords, people's bemusement at why the government doesn't think a plan's a good idea.
It's got to come from the Prime Minister or someone that in the cabinet. I think it's got to be owned by a very senior person, whether it's the Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, or whether it's Peter Carl, who does the irrelevant, but it's got to be, I think, a person in government that does this stuff. I'm not going to say anything that is kind of big new news. I think that the first thing, especially knowing a little bit about how prime ministers operate and what the powers are that they have, you just have to make it your own personal priority. And I would make it a personal priority to build not just the best startups in the world, to be the most AI safety place, and all the platitudes that come out of ministers for the last 15, 20 years about technology, but actually have a detailed plan about what a modern Britain looks like. That's the most important thing. I think the prime ministers can do a bunch of stuff, probably less than some people imagine, but the thing they can do is keep a priority top of mind of their cabinet.
I do just think it maybe requires industry as one to come to us and say, right, this is everything that we can put into this. And then we could, as one city region, say, okay, and this is everything that we feel we have got with our single settlement with Whitehall. So can between us, we then help everybody online. But I think our job would get easier if that DWP piece came in, because that's critical funding, isn't it? That is about supporting people to find opportunity and find work. And, you know, if people haven't got home connectivity, how honestly are they going to do that? So it implies change at the Greater Manchester level. I think it implies change at the UK government level and at an industry level. But I think we need to start talking in those terms. You know, we've done brilliant things together. And I keep saying, you know, we are grateful to the Good Things Foundation, but it has to become sort of mainstream, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it has to become strategic and city region wide.
Very good. So you just heard from a few people there. Obviously, Martha, that was us a year ago. And the Baronesses, Anna Healy and Baroness Dido Harding. And then at the end, that was Andy Burnham. So they were 3 of the conversations that we had last year. So Martha, putting you on the spot, coming first to you, that clearly we were asking for leadership. And I'm just wondering, do you think we've got it now?
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that the current administration, if you like, are more connected around this stuff than I remember for a long time. And by that, I mean 2 things. I mean, firstly, recognizing there's an issue. You know, I think both of us, you much more kind of relentlessly than me, but both of us have spent a long time convincing politicians that this is a real issue, not just for the people who are digitally excluded, but for all of us, because we're never going to get the benefits of a fully connected society if we are not fully connected. And I know this is a debate that we've had for a long time. So I feel as though those arguments I'm making less kind of frequently and people understand it. And the second reason I think they're more connected is because I think they work as a cabinet team in a better way than I have seen for quite a long time. We've been doing a lot of work about the digital centre of government. And we launched some products and services with Peter Kyle, and there was Liz Kendall sitting in the front row from DWP, and the Chancellor has been supporting in other ways, and Johnny Reynolds is right. So I just feel as though they see this as an issue that does need to be cross-departmental. Now, the big rub in all of that is that's great, and everyone on those clips talked about leadership, but leadership isn't just political, as you know well, Helen. It's got to be in the people that actually execute the projects, and that's TBD. I think that talking about policy, putting the money there, announcing the plan, brilliant, but the strategy is delivery. This has got to be about delivery.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that something that we'll come to later is about having that support from cross government. And we heard Andy Burnham there talk about DWP. So obviously you said that Liz Kendall was at the Digital Centre for Government. Is that how then, from a Secretary of State, do you then say to the team delivering Get Britain Working that I've signed this forward for this Digital Inclusion Action Plan? How are you now going to put that in Get Britain Working? I guess that's still the bit that I'm worried about, I guess I would say.
I completely and totally recognise that, and I can relate to it in multiple things that are going on in government right now, whether it's the IA Opportunities Action Plan or the plan we've got around what the next incarnation of the government digital service looks like. The thing that's interesting, and the experience that I've had in the last 15 years of being on the outside and looking slightly in the government, is that policy and delivery are more joined up now than they ever have been. And that's partly because of what technology has done. You can't just say a thing and then expect it to happen. Actually, you're normally building a service or delivering a new way of doing something. And that involves people that have been very heavy on policy and being very good at doing those projects that you're talking about, doing the reports, making the plans. Now they've actually got to also focus on the delivery part. And that is not a skill set that I think is often found across government, and it requires ministers to stay on it and keep it a priority. So that's the challenge. And I think, as we say, I'm more hopeful than I have been, but I'm also realistic that there are a lot of different things that need to be driven across government to make this really happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So one more question for you, Martha, and then I'll come to you, Sarah. But I think there are quite a lot of people here who are in the audience who are from those community organisations, and so I think when I think it was Dido said a little bit of money, I think they're probably all hoping that Dido's little bit of money is quite a lot for them, right? But also I think that the clever thing about bringing in DWP and DFE in particular, but I'm not going to say Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government, because we know that local government is on their knees as well.
Yes.
But DWP spending a lot of money on trying to help people to get back to work.
Yes.
That's good for the economy. And then obviously DFE, they spend less now than they used to spend on adult education, but they still have a budget for adult education. So I think that there's that about translating that policy into the pockets of the budgets where there is already money, but making sure that digital inclusion is part of that, because I think that's going to be a lot easier than getting new money.
Yes, just there is no money right now.
Exactly.
The spending review is happening. It is dominating all of the conversations that I find I'm in government, and it's complicated because government doesn't work like a business. You or I, and even a charity might say, okay, if we invest this, then we're going to get this out the other end.
Yeah.
But government doesn't really work like that. You sort of build it in a different way. It's more comes from we're spending this. How can we spend less, rather than if we invest, what is going to be the output over here or the outcome over there? So it's really complicated. And I think we all have to start from the assumption that there's no new money, that this is going to be a reorganizing. I mean, we've just seen an increase in defense spending, and we've seen complexities in the macroeconomic climate. It's not that there's some magic beans everywhere for this project. So that's the kind of more skeptical and depressing view. But having said that, these are not huge amounts of money, and I do think actually that I'm hoping that some of the community groups. I'm so sorry, there's a background noise. Excuse me. It'll go in 2 seconds. It's just the change of the speaker. Wait for 1 second. You're witnessing Parliament in action here.
Yeah, democracy in action.
Dongs a bell when a new speaker stands up. What I'm hoping is that what Deirdre talks about is small amounts of money that actually are quite big to community groups. And certainly when I was close to some of the things happening on the ground, it was amazing what people were doing, not that much resources. So sometimes you just need to fuel things. You need to copy best practice. You need to be able to scale things up. We don't need to be inventing a whole load of new stuff. What we need to do is backing the things that are working. And so I think money is fundamental, but I hope it's not tens of millions and billions. It can go a long way, because we also do know a lot of the things that are working in this area, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the shifting the 2% of economic activity, the extra 2 million people working, I think is going to drive something like 40 billion a year.
Very
and so that, and all of the work, we know that digital exclusion is a barrier to work and opportunity, and we know that digital inclusion is an enabler.
Exactly.
So as long as we can make sure that is built in those pathways to work. But it's not just government. I mean, Sarah, obviously you work closely with government, but also with businesses. So we don't just need government leadership here, do we? It's got to be cross-sector. But where do you think business can really add value and help in driving digital inclusion?
Well, yeah, you're right. And I mean, I work in all corners of it. And I would just echo what Martha's just said about no money, because I obviously sit as the chair of the Money and Pension Service, and we're an offshoot of DWP. And there was no money even before the percentage of GDP going into defence needed to go up. So I think we just have to assume, and you saw that when the first action in the government's digital strategy was effectively to create an innovation fund of £2 million, which we can all work out is not going to go anywhere at all. So I think we're very clear that there's not going to be a lot of government money. What I've always argued, though, is that the role of government is primarily to what I would say describe as creating a framework within which people plug what they're doing. We see it in all sorts of areas where there's overlap with government activity. Financial education is another example, where the risk is businesses in their desire to do things, and many of them do want to lean into this agenda. It's good for business in lots of ways for all the reasons you've articulated, tend to put their footprint down in a way that isn't very efficient because they put it on top of each other. So we do all the same things. So too many people trying to go into one geographic location, let's say, and provide support for users in that area. And then you find there's another area where nobody is. And so I think that sense of how do we get businesses to get credit for what they do, because that's important, that the government, there are lots of people doing very good things in here. I mean, I work on the board of BT. I would say BT are Openreach are putting fibre into all sorts of corners of the country to make fast fibre accessible to people. It's really important. If you want to job seek, you don't need to be doing it on old style copper. But also places like Lloyd's, where I spent a lot of time, we're obviously doing a lot too. So I think what businesses can do is they can definitely bring resource, they can bring drive through their people. So a lot of them have big volunteer groups. I mean, BT have 100,000 people, Lloyd's have about 60, 70,000 people. These people will turn into volunteers. We equip them to be digital champions. So, we've got resource, we've got reach, we're all across the country, in all sorts of places. And we've got the desire to contribute and to be given credit for contributing. I mean, to be truthful, we don't really want to do it in complete silence. We'd like a little bit of a rallying call. But what we need to know is what's the framework and what are the holes and the gaps, and how can we best plug what we're doing into the space so we don't find ourselves, sort of falling over each other in one bit of the country and find nobody's in another bit. And I was pleased to see Andy Burnham on your thing, because when we started digital academies in Manchester, in UK.
I'm sorry, Sarah. Hold that thought a moment. Martha, go do democracy.
I'm so
much.
sorry. I'm so sorry. I really salute all the work and everyone here that's working so hard on this issue. Please know that you have supporters all over the place, and some of us will continue to try and raise the issues where we can. I really appreciate all the work, and thank you for including me today.
Thank you, Martha. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah, so I mean, I was glad to see Andy Burnham, because I think one of the things that I really liked about the strategy, but I also think is one of the really big difficulties in delivering it, to Martha's point, is that acceptance that some of this has to be done nationally, some regionally, some locally, and some hyper locally. And I think what Andy Burnham's done, he's in Greater Manchester, they've got one of the very few places where the digital skills capability has actually increased over the last decade. And I would put a lot of that down to the very integrated way that Andy has brought people in within the Greater Manchester area. And I worked at United Utilities, we were part of that in North West as well. So, I had a number of things in that pie early on, and you could see it making a real difference. So I think a lot of what comes down nationally has at some point to be translated into local. And that makes the leadership challenge much more difficult, because Peter Kyle can do a top down, but he can't do the local stuff. And you've got to have people like Andy who pull together a local identity and make it happen on the ground. So I think that'll be one of the things I'll be looking for, is how are they going to translate this national vision in a world where they don't have a lot of money to filter down. So they can't do it by just saying to people, you can get a grant if you do X or Y. It's got to be an engagement process. And as you say, lots of parties got to have to come in to bring resources, and that can only be brought together locally. So it'll be interesting to see how they think that's going to turn national policy into local delivery.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think that something that we hear a lot is in the government's digital inclusion action plan, but there's no silver bullet, and I think that is true for what you're describing as well, right? So Andy Burnham and Greater Manchester do a great job. Leeds Council do a fantastic job with 100% digital Leeds. But I was just talking to a digital inclusion hub community partner today, and they were saying that their council freezes them out, never gives any money to anybody, and so it's almost like we can't assume that the whole country will do the best practice. We can assume we can help the worst practice to get slightly better, but also I think that the hyperlocal needs that support. And so I guess that's where that good things, we're both national and hyperlocal, and we don't have any, other layers, any other, places for money to leak out, if you like. So I think it's really about how do we make all of these things work? So things like the National Data Bank, as an example, that's much more efficient to do once and do it nationally.
Yes.
You get the SIMs from the telcos to get that out to the local organisations, libraries, housing associations, as well as small charities and volunteer groups. So to get those SIMs to the people who really, really need those on the ground, that wouldn't make sense to be done at a regional or a local level. No. So what are those different, back to your framework actually, Sarah,
yes, exactly.
What's the framework for this at all these different levels? I think what we'll do now, so we've got some more videos. So they're loosely, I would say, so there's like 3 lots of videos. One's around skills, one's around access, and one's around confidence. So we'll just play those. They're about 10 minutes. So let's play those, and then we can maybe deep dive into some of those topics that come up through. And I'm hoping that we've got most of the people that we've interviewed in those videos. So we'll just play those videos for you. And then there's some questions in the chat panel, Sarah, as well, if you want to have a look at those.
And so to shine a light, I think, on the way out of digital exclusion, but obviously you need to make sure those building blocks of, you've got some kind of device, you've got some kind of connectivity, and you know some fundamental building blocks of skills.
So much of what you're saying, it's not a technology problem, right? It's, you said, the lack of an inquisitive mind, which starts from the youngest age, from education, what kind of educational resource you have. Did you have a teacher that taught you that you could inquire? And I mean, that's one of the most interesting things for me around these exponential technologies, and for you and your communities as well. about this quest for continuous learning, and that there isn't just a very prescribed paradigm of how you can be successful in life. It's much more to do with what are your expectations for life? What do you think because now you can do more than you ever could do before with less resources, but you have to have that kind of spark of inspiration. You have to believe that, you have the confidence to want more for your life, to understand that you can do more. And to me, that starts with pedagogy and education. And that's a whole nother...
and belief and opportunity.
Yes.
And, so I'm a massive optimist. So I think that's why we do the work that we do, because we believe that we can add value. We can work in partnership to shine that light, to get that talk.
Absolutely. And this is why the bottom up and top down approach need to work together. Absolutely. I think government needs to reassess pedagogy and education and subsidize access to devices, make sure that the kind of infrastructure and connectivity is there. But you need people such as yourselves to work in the community and work with those who are most marginalized to help them understand. So it's kind of this meeting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, we're a digital inclusion charity, Alan, so I want to talk about digital inclusion. That there wasn't a lot in the Commission report about digital inclusion, but I suppose I felt that was because it underpins everything that we need to do here. It underpins improving health, improving skills, helping people out of poverty, helping people into work. 92% of all jobs require people to have basic digital skills. And also, you mentioned in the report about people, for example, using mental health apps to help them with depression or other forms of mental illness. There wasn't a lot in the report, but do you think that digital inclusion could form part of future solutions around... I'm going to now move on from pathways to work and talk about Get Britain Working, because obviously that's the white paper that's coming up.
Yes, I mean, obviously it's got a big part to play because the future is digital. We know that. And, we can't afford to have, I think the numbers are pretty stark, almost a third of people who are economically inactive, don't have decent digital access at the moment. So that's a huge problem. And, it's rather like saying people don't have access to electricity or gas or water. It's just a vital utility nowadays. And you've got a whole bunch of people, as you know better than anyone, are excluded as a consequence. And that is going to get worse, not better, unless we're very, very careful. So absolutely, all of that has got to be underpinned by making sure that there is fair and equal digital access, because otherwise the opportunities that are going to be available to people are going to be unevenly distributed. And frankly, we've got enough of that in our society. We don't want the gap getting wider. We want it getting narrower. And this is why actually, I'm relatively positive and optimistic about the government's agenda, because at its heart, I think what they're trying to do is to create a more inclusive economy, growth economy, but one that is a form of inclusive growth. And digital has got an absolutely vital part to play in all of that.
Much of the work that we do as an organisation wouldn't be possible without a collaboration between business and civil society. But many of the solutions that we are looking to the future to see that people have enough money to be able to afford the essentials are around the cost of things and the level of income that people have. So there is a role for all of us as employers in terms of how we support people who are working for us and the levels at which people are remunerated, the flexibility within their work. But then there's also something around social tariffs. I understand that just over 5% of people who are on the lowest incomes are accessing social tariffs. How do we improve that? Government have a role in promoting that. Businesses have a role in informing their customers of those social tariffs being available. There are many ways in which we can work together to support people, and we do. I think what gives me great hope is I see that collaboration between business, civil society and government in supporting the work that we do currently. what might that look like as we work together to build a society where everyone has enough money to afford the essentials and are able therefore to engage more actively in all aspects of society.
So we need to make healthcare access really easy, and we need to improve the experience of access, because we know from all of the patient surveys, typically the population that have the poorest experience are also our most deprived populations. And so nationally, we are looking at a model of modern general practice. So it means that we move away from a first come, first served approach, fastest finger first, and a single one size fits all model, to one where you have more inclusive access. So you can access through going online, the telephone, in person. And what we see is that people use access routes dynamically. It's not that they're always online or they're always on the telephone. It change depending on their circumstance, the urgency of their need. So choice is really, really important, but it's also about parity of access routes. So each of those contact channels is treated equally, and that they're all highly usable and highly accessible.
To look a bit more at sort of like the green side of things as well. So looking at recycling equipment, maybe getting bigger organisations that are using things that are replacing them all the time to donate those devices to places like the Device Bank. Also to get companies that are sort of making money out of digital and doing things like that to sort of give back a little bit, to try and help people become part of the digital world. Because it's all very well sort of saying, oh, we're moving things online today, you've got to fill that form in online. But if there's nobody there to help somebody to do that, it's really, really difficult. And eventually they're going to lose a bit of business by not supporting that. So if the future government can sort of help people to feel more empowered by talking to businesses, other sort of bigger organisations, even government bodies and things like that, just to sort of look at what they can do to support maybe the grassroots organisations that are giving the digital support to the people that need to access their services. So the electricity board could maybe donate a bit of money so that a digital hub can keep going to support people to be able to access their bills online, pay online. It's just sort of form that relationship. Society does need to sort of join up with digital inclusion, because I was also thinking that, for example, free Wi-Fi would be amazing. If there was like free Wi-Fi in different places across the country, that would include a hell of a lot more people, and that would make a real difference to people's day-to-day lives. And I think if the people who are sort of tearing ahead with things like AI, different platforms, different technology maybe in workplaces, they're replacing people with computers and things, if they can then sort of come round to meet the people who are still digitally excluded at the bottom by supporting them, then it all becomes more, I think it's going to be less scary for people, because they'll realise that they're not being left behind because the people at the top are helping the people at the bottom, and sort of Robin Hood sort of situation maybe. Future government should be investing more into digital inclusion hubs around the country. They need to be there to support people who are supporting the people who are excluded. And so it is an important thing, because it's the same thing really as the food bank. For us, we sort of see digital inclusion as a human right, and it's something that people need to be able to do, need to be included in. Otherwise they're missing out. They're not taking full advantage of what's going on in the world, because the world is moving ahead. Things like online banking. Banks are closed. People have to do stuff online. If they haven't got a bank in their town or their village or whatever, the people having to travel a long time if they can't actually do it online. So essential day-to-day things need to be accessible.
I'll echo that everything needs to be accessible, which is absolutely true. So there we heard from Nina Schick, who's is an AI global thought leader who I interviewed last summer. Alan Milburn, who has many hats, was obviously in the last government, is now the lead non-exec director at the Department for Health and Social Care. Emma Reevy, who's the CEO of Trussell Trust, Dr. Minal Bakai, who is a director at NHS England, leading transformational primary care, but she's also a GP in her 1 day a week. She calls it her respite day. Not sure how many GPs would echo that. And then last, that was Hayley Nelson, who runs Learn for Life, which is one of the digital inclusion hubs in Sheffield. So just a taster there of some of the things that people can see in the interviews. There was a lot there. One thing that really struck me was around both Alan Milburn and Emma Reevy were talking about that sort of fair and equal society that, and I think all of the people that I was lucky enough to have conversations with last year actually emphasize this point, which I think is fascinating because quite often, although people did talk about channels and choice and doing things online, actually digital inclusion is about a lot more than just transactions, Sarah. It's really about and you must see this in your wider inclusion work. This isn't just about being able to do something. This is about feeling and
Part of something.
being and being able to participate on an equal footing.
Yeah, it is. And that's, I think, that's what you see in all the types of inclusion that I work in: disability, financial inclusion, and digital inclusion. There's a lot of overlap between them as well. And I think there absolutely is a sense that people who are excluded are getting left behind. And it's that sense of being shut out and left behind and not being part of the mainstream conversation, I think characterizes all the forms of exclusion, actually. So, and I think when I think about the strands that the government's put into its strategy, the way it's framing it around affordable access and skills, I think there's a potential to lose the last component, if you like, of what I see, which is the motivation and trust.
Yeah.
Now, I can have the skills, I can have the affordable access, I can have the kit, but I still don't want to bank online.
Yeah.
Because I don't trust the system. I think I'm going to lose my identity or whatever it is. And I think we must make sure that when we go through and we tick the little boxes that says, yes, somebody understands how to access a computer, they've got a bit of kit, we've given them some data. Why are we still not going back 4 weeks later and finding that they've suddenly jumped into the swimming pool and they're swimming around? Because they don't jump because they're not sure how deep it is or whether there's anything in there that they don't like the look of. And I think somehow we've got to, certainly one of the things that BT is very focused on is making its whole networks much more secure and being able to get people to trust technology much more. Because there is, it's a bit like moving from your phone on a copper line to a digital line. All of a sudden you move from something you really knew and understood to something you really don't think you understand at all. And all of a sudden you thought you were on top of life, but now you're not on top of life at all. And I think that happens in digital exclusion as well. Something you used to be able to do in person or on the phone, all of a sudden you go on and they say, has to be done online. And all of a sudden you go, I'm shut out. That's another door that's just closed in front of me. And I was interested that in the government strategy plan, they talked about ensuring that people continue to have access offline if they needed to.
Yeah.
And one of the observations I make about GDS over the last decade is that sense of assisted digital, which was always supposed to be there, in a lot of places isn't there at all. If you want to apply for a driving license but you can't do it online, I don't see anything saying phone this number and we'll do it assisted. Or so I did think that was a bit of a dichotomy, and they sort of slipped it in. I wonder how serious they are about it. But if you do that, then people just do feel like you've shut the door in their faces.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, so for us at Good Things Foundation, we very much believe that anybody who can or would like to have the support to be able to move to do it online should be helped to do it online.
Yes.
And so that actually, that motivation piece. So I think actually the fourth focus area, the confidence, local support,
yes, and community,
within the action plan, I think that is what the people who wrote that action plan have been thinking about. Is like, how do we build motivation? How do we build resilience? how do we build confidence into this? So it's not just about, I can apply for a blue badge, I can send an email. It has to be about that participation, that fair and equal society. So actually, one of the questions we've got from Pauline Roche is that, do the speakers feel there's a class divide in digital exclusion? How do working class people gain the confidence to use the internet when they want to, and advocate for face-to-face services when they want to prefer it? So I guess that's something that you were just talking about a little bit, Sarah, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I think there are many things that affect people's likelihood to be digitally excluded. Age is clearly one of them. And I think, frankly, level of education and level of financial skills, which also is wrapped up with some of the class question that goes behind that question. I think that is also a factor. And there is definitely a case that I'm sure if you did the demographics, it would look skewed. One of the things I think is quite nice about what's being talked about now is the community hubs and the potential for the community hubs to be really well connected from an internet point of view, very easy to access, and would be places where people could get support to make that transition that you've just described. And I think one of the things I see in inclusion generally, and we're doing a lot of it in financial inclusion in MAPS, is taking the capability to deliver into the community, to be delivered by people that are trusted by the people they're delivering it to. So, and there were a number of questions in the chat, I think, about how big businesses and small businesses could join together. Because big businesses can do some stuff nationally, but actually when it comes to hand in hand helping people to cross the dividing line, that's not a thing that big businesses are good at. They need to work with local organisations. And there are some big organisations like Age UK who are trying to bridge that gap and be a bit of both. But equally, there are, when we do debt commissioning, for example, in MAPS, we work a lot with very small local organisations who we commission to provide debt to people because it's clear that they're embedded in communities in a way that we're not. So I do think there needs to be a partnership for this to work. And I also understand the concern of the smaller organisations. Will we get squeezed out by like when PFI was in, and all the big boys sort of muscled in and they took all the stuff, and all the smaller local organisations who have the real connection with the customers sort of lost out. And I think we need to find a way of making those two things work together, because I know in BT we've committed to move thousands of people with Ability Net's help across the divide, but there are 8.5 million people who lack basic digital. We can't really make a dent on that ourselves, nor can Lloyds, nor can any of us. So actually we need those myriad of points in the communities.
Yeah, absolutely.
It would be a really nice bridge to making that happen, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And we just passed 7,000 organisations in the National Digital Inclusion Network last week. So I mean that's a phenomenal number of local organisations who want to help. I think one point that actually I think it was Pauline again, she put this as a comment actually in the chat panel about when government or public sector and she's picked on those who says there's no money. I also get businesses say that as well, like, oh no, I don't have that in my budget. Very, very rich companies, I would like to say. But is that and she quotes William Gibson or paraphrases to say, it was more to say that there is money, it's just not evenly distributed. And I think that's what I was trying to get to with Martha. I mean, I think, Martha acknowledged this as well, absolutely, is that where is the money in government that is being spent on people for whom digital exclusion is a barrier and digital inclusion would be an enabler? And how do we make sure that those policymakers make the right decisions about commissioning for that money, so that the money is spent on helping the people? Sorry, I think I'm going to say embedding digital inclusion, but that has to be done. I guess it's back to your point about squeezing out. It's not about, it has to be done in partnership with those hyper-local organisations who know what's going on, and then with the national organisations who can bring scaled solutions like Data Bank, for example. And so we really need to make sure that that I think it's back to your point about the framework, isn't it? It's about recognising where all the different good practices and the willing actors, but trying to make sure that's coordinated as well as it possibly could be. Because one thing that we have seen is that there's quite a lot of businesses who have created content for digital skills, basic digital skills. And so that then turns around and people say to me, well, who do you think is the best? I go, well, surely that shouldn't be the point. Like in an ideal world, let's say from now onwards, we'd like to say we probably don't need any more content unless it's about new things, or if it's about creating that content in a new way or serving it in a new way to reach new people. So sometimes for all the right intentions, people will create a program, a project, an initiative, some content, but actually there's no fit with what else is there and what else is going on.
And I think it's really interesting to think about what the cross-departmental action group in government is going to be doing, and the extent to which it could be helping to create a framework within which it gets into the questions of how do we recognise the value of moving people into the included group as opposed to the excluded group, and therefore how should we think about trying to encourage businesses to spend whatever money they're going to spend on things that actually do work. Because that's one of the other, I watch it a lot in financial education. I think there's quite a lot of money thrown into financial education by organisations without really any sense it's getting traction and creating any change in the system at all. And actually, to the extent that businesses do have money, and they don't have bottomless pots of money for clear, because they have all sorts of other things they want to do with it, but to the extent they are willing to invest in it, the thing that the cross-cutting group should be doing is making sure that those people know where to spend that money in a way that's effective and know whether they can work with local organisations, which is quite counterintuitive in a way for a big organisation, because it slightly lets go of control and you sort of slightly feel nervous that you've just sort of let loose something you don't know if it's going to work. But if actually there can be some reassurance from the government side that there are certain things that work, certain organisations that are proven to deliver value, then at least I think they and that's not about them putting money in. That's partly about this framework. That's about them fleshing the framework out so that it's not just about what are the needs, but it's also about how do we compare the effectiveness of the different delivery mechanisms, and how can people learn from that to make sure that when they do contribute to the delivery, that they're doing so in a way that gets them good value for money for every £1 million they're prepared to put in.
Luke Oakes from Cambridgeshire Libraries asked the question about following the launch of the action plan, what needs to change so that we, and he's very cross-sectoral there, can work at the required scale to deliver the change needed without burning out. And I think that's interesting because obviously that's both, like you're saying, at all the different levels. I think the interesting thing about burnout often is when, like you're saying, like let go of control, which I think is right. But sometimes I find that burnout is when it doesn't feel like there is any, I'm going to go back to your word framework actually, or plan, right? That everybody knows what they're doing, everyone's working together, the classic metaphor of the people in a boat all rowing together, right? Going to the same goal in a boat together and rowing, but each individual person who is rowing is playing their own part in moving.
Absolutely.
And I think that the real trick is going to be about making sure that feels like everybody's in the same boat. And I do get the sense from some of the questions and the comments here is an anxiety at that hyperlocal level. That the top down is going to be a lot more loud and noisy than the bottom up.
And I think that's why I said I'll be really interested to watch the transition from top down into local, because I think the way that I think it could work is if we went to somewhere like Greater Manchester, who've been doing a regional, sort of halfway between a local and a regional delivery programme for the last, it's a decade at least, I think Andy Byrne has been at it. And actually there is quite a lot of learning in there, and there's evidence of progress. And if you could have a template that effectively said, we have experience of how top down can be translated into local delivery. And then what you need is a local owner in each locality. Now, whether that's, we used to have these 39 LEPs, that was functional economic geography, they were quite interesting. But, what it does is it says, you've got to have leadership. I mean, we also, at the beginning, it was all very clear. The leadership is not national because that's too far away. So somewhere down the system, you need to find more localized leadership who can hold this all together. And if you had a localized leadership and then almost a template that says this is how it works, you have to have local water company doing this, you have the local DWP doing this, the local Citizens Advice Bureau does this, and actually the local community organisations sort of fit in around those big blocks in this way, then I think you could create a local plan, and then I think you'd have something that local organisations could plug into. I don't see how a local organisation can plug into a nationally led plan. It's just too far away and it's too diffuse. That I think we do need to breathe down to something that's much more recognisable and tailored to the localities, because the localities are so different across the country.
I mean, I do often disagree with people who have I think that is the received wisdom, what you said. I'm not sure that they are necessarily, right? Because obviously urban and rural is different, wealthy and poor are different.
Yeah.
But the reality is digitally excluded people are socially excluded people. They have worse health outcomes. They're often financially excluded, living in poverty, experiencing poverty premium. That by volume more live in the urban areas than in the rural areas, but rural isolation and exclusion is incredibly relevant. There's some areas, not that many, but there are areas where there isn't good connectivity. Chris Bryant's constituency, I think, is one of them, which I'm not sure is great for all.
You're working very hard on that, I have to say.
Yes, exactly. I was going to say all the telcos are beavering away, making sure they can fix that. So that I think that my worry with this acceptance that areas are different because leadership is different. That who is leading the community, that city, that town, that county, and what's their vision. And actually, I thought that so the conversation with Martha in Digital Futures for Good, I was very inspired by her bringing it back to a vision of a modern Britain, a modern society.
Yes.
And actually, that although Digital Futures for Good was very policy focused, if you like, that I was very privileged to be able to speak to a large number of inspiring and knowledgeable people who sort of understood this issue and came at it from lots of different directions and perspectives. But actually, Martha's right, and we heard some of it from Emma Reevey there too, CEO of Trussell, that actually, if we believe in or as Alan Milburn said, a fair and equal society, where everybody who wants it can have digital access, can get help to get the skills and the confidence.
That
actually sometimes it's about not having 1,000 flowers blooming, or maybe if we did it at the local level, it'll be like 10 million flowers blooming. But say let's actually have 5 really brilliant, wonderful things. We know there's no silver bullet. We know that 5 things won't fix this, but let's do 5 things and do it really well and do it together. I actually think would shift the needle more than actually translating it down to the local level. And local authorities, bless them, have so many priorities and so little money. So actually, if we think about money as well, is that they have really not that much money at all. We're getting near the end here. There's some brilliant questions and comments.
I'm just reading the
There's one here from which I thought we should pick on because of it's women's International Women's Day.
International Women's Day, exactly.
And so although I've lost it, let me paraphrase. Is it to say something about should we be doing anything for women? And I think the question from was it Claire from Digital, Kate from Digital, there we go, I found it. I've lost it again. But I think it was to say that women have different challenges to men,
Yeah.
that although not exclusively, but predominantly they are still main carers for children.
Yeah.
And also let's add in there for elderly parents often as
Yes.
well. And I think she mentioned menopause, although my chat keeps moving.
Yeah.
So just with maybe your International Women's Day hat on, but also just with your inspiring woman hat on as well. A comment on Kate around International Women's Day and digital exclusion, and then maybe like what's next, your big vision for digital inclusion in the UK. So what would you say in 3 years' time if we came back and said we nailed that? What would that be?
Yeah. Okay. So for international, should we do something different for women? I think the answer is yes and no. I think the goal is the same, which is that male or female, we want people to be included and able to access the services and support that they need. But I think in its execution, strategy, no, execution, yes, because I think you'll find women at different places at different times to engage with. They have different motivations, and therefore their emphasis on what they want out of their technical digital skills will be different. So they'll be certainly more engaged, as you say, in socializing, for example. It'd be very important for them to maintaining contacts with children. My mother's turning 97 next week, so really important that we have a digital connection, that we email, because I can keep handling this. So I think, and they might want to do things different times of day, and so on. So I think strategically, no, we need men and women, to be across the line, as it were, equally. But in terms of how I execute towards getting them and engaging them, where and when I do that, and what I focus on, probably yes, a little bit of tailoring to the audience is never a bad thing, I think. And my vision is not a 3-year vision, to be honest. I'm afraid it's just not going to happen that fast, I think. I have been working in this space towards a sort of 10-year vision, really. And one of the things that I've been thinking about is the connection with the BBC and the way the BBC broadcasts and the BBC's desire to go digital effectively. And everybody wants to be able to book an appointment at the doctor's online. Everybody wants to be able to watch television online, if that's the only place it's going to be. So for me, we've sort of got a plan across a 10-year horizon, really, not a shorter one. And it's got to be part of a view of a modern Britain in all sorts of ways, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I have a passionate vision for what disability inclusion needs to look like. We have a passionate vision at Matt's about what financial inclusion needs to look like. This needs to be a society where you started in society does not limit where you're going to end. And I think if you're going to achieve that, and that fair and inclusive society, and I've spent most of my last 20 years really trying to help organizations to be economically prosperous and profitable, but also socially inclusive, because actually we sort of feel like we need to win together. We don't want some people to win and some others not. So more of a sort of a common ground, and a sense that where you started doesn't preclude you from where you're going to finish, I think.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Martha, for coming away from the debate in the House of Lords to be with us for half an hour. Thank you everyone who's put like all the amazing comments and questions in the chat panel. It's been fantastic. What I could keep up with, that is. So the Digital Futures for Good report is now live. It's on our website. So please do go and read it. If you did miss any of the videos last year, then they're all still there, and I would highly recommend them. They're very inspiring. I want to also thank our strategic partners from Good Things Foundation, Vodafone, Virgin Media, O2, Nominet, and Accenture, who made this series possible, and also the teams at Virgin Media, O2, Vodafone, and Nominet, who actually did the filming and the editing. So they super made it possible for us to focus on the quality of the conversation and to be able to write up in the report that we're launching today. So thank you, Sarah, for helping us with the launch. please, everybody, do have a look in the chat panel. There's the link to our report and to the webpage. And hopefully I will see you all very, very soon. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks, Helen. Bye.